She was just a magistrate's ward, trapped in a village that feared the shadows. But when the ground shook and 100 monstrous wolves dropped to their knees in the mud at her feet, she realized the terrifying Lycan King didn't want the village's tribute. He only wanted her. The year was 1247, and the fortified settlement of Oakhaven Parish lived under a shadow that neither the church nor the King of Men could lift. Nestled at the base of the Crimson Ridge, the village was bound by a brutal pact forged generations ago to prevent their total annihilation. It was known as the Blood Moon Treaty. Every 10 years, the Lycan Horde, a monstrous army of shape-shifting beasts from the high mountains, was permitted to march directly through the human valleys on their way to the northern hunting grounds. The rules were absolute. Doors barred, windows shuttered, fires extinguished. Anyone caught outside when the great horns blew was considered forfeit. Gloria Sterling knew the laws better than anyone. At 19, she was the ward of her uncle, Magistrate Thomas Sterling, a man whose heart was as cold and unforgiving as the cobblestones of the village square. Following the death of her parents in a mysterious fire at the Blackwood estate years prior, Gloria had been treated as little more than an indentured servant in her own family's home. She scrubbed the floors, tended the hearth, and bore the brunt of her uncle's volatile temper. Worse still was the future her uncle had orchestrated for her. She was to be wed to Arthur Pendleton, the arrogant, cruel son of Oakhaven's wealthiest wool merchant. Arthur took sick pleasure in tormenting Gloria, viewing her not as a future wife, but as a prized, captive bird he could break at his leisure. The morning of the crossing was heavy with the scent of impending rain and crushing dread. A thick, unnatural fog rolled down from the Crimson Ridge, swallowing the pine trees and creeping toward the village walls. Inside the magistrate's manor, panic was a palpable thing. Servants rushed to nail thick oak planks over the windows and drag heavy iron-bound chests against the doors. "Move faster, you useless girl!" Arthur barked, shoving Gloria so hard her shoulder slammed into the stone archway of the kitchen. He was sweating, his usually pristine velvet doublet stained with the grease of his own nervous perspiration. "The vanguard will breach the southern gate in less than 10 minutes. If the scent of your unwashed rags draws them to this house, I will throw you to them myself." Gloria bit her tongue, tasting the metallic tang of blood. "I am fetching the last of the salt and sage for the cellar door, Arthur," she replied evenly, though her hands trembled. "Then fetch it and get into the earth beneath the floorboards," Magistrate Thomas snapped, appearing from the hallway with a heavy iron key in his hand. "The entire parish is already underground. We are the last." The distant, bone-rattling boom of the southern gate's warning bell echoed through the valley. It was a single, mournful toll. The wolves had arrived. "They're here," Arthur gasped, his face draining of color. Panic, raw and unadulterated, seized him. Without another word, he shoved past Gloria, scrambling down the narrow stone steps into the reinforced cellar, where her uncle and the household servants were already taking shelter. Gloria grabbed the bundle of dried sage and turned to follow. But as she reached the top of the stairs, Arthur looked up at her, his eyes wild with a cowardly, irrational terror. He saw the heavy iron door of the cellar, and he saw Gloria standing in the doorway of the kitchen, bathed in the dim light of the encroaching fog. "Arthur, move, let me in." "You're too slow," Arthur hissed, his voice cracking. "You'll leave the door open too long. You'll doom us all." "Arthur, no!" Gloria screamed, lunging forward. But the heavy oak door slammed shut in her face. The agonizing screech of the iron bolt sliding into place echoed like a death sentence. She slammed her fists against the wood, tearing the skin from her knuckles. Uncle Thomas, please, open the door." Only muffled silence answered her. She had been locked out, left as forfeit. A second bell tolled. The sound of massive, padded paws hitting the muddy earth outside began to vibrate through the floorboards of the kitchen. It sounded like an earthquake. The low, guttural growls of 100 massive beasts reverberated through the very air, vibrating in Gloria's chest. She backed away from the cellar door, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. She had to hide. She looked wildly around the kitchen, but the windows were boarded, and the main doors were barred from the inside. There was nowhere to go but the small, enclosed courtyard that housed the well. A dead end. The front door of the manor groaned. They were sniffing at the wood. The sheer force of a massive body brushing against the exterior wall sent dust cascading from the ceiling. Gloria backed up, pushing open the back door and stumbling out into the mud of the central village square, desperate to find an open shed, an unlatched cellar, anything. But she was too late. The fog in the square swirled violently, parted by the arrival of monsters. Gloria froze by the stone well, the freezing rain now coming down in sheets, plastering her simple linen dress to her skin. She had nowhere to run. The crossing had begun, and she was standing right in the middle of it. They poured into the square like a river of living nightmares. These were not the common wolves that stalked the deer in the whispering woods. These were Lycans in their primal forms. Monstrous, dire wolves the size of draft horses, their fur thick and matted with rain, muscle roping beneath their coats with every predatory stride. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural, violent intelligence, amber, crimson, and piercing yellow piercing through the gloom. Gloria pressed her back against the cold, wet stone of the well, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle her own sobbing breath. "Close your eyes," she told herself. "It will be quick. It has to be quick." The vanguard of the pack, heavily scarred and battle-hardened, loped into the square. Leading them was a wolf of terrifying proportions, its coat the color of dried rust, a jagged silver scar slashing across its snout. This was Commander Gideon, a beast of legends whispered around human hearths. Gideon paused in the center of the square. His massive nostrils flared, taking in the scent of the rain, the mud, the terrified humans cowering beneath the earth. And then he froze. His massive head snapped toward the well, his glowing yellow eyes locked onto Gloria. Gloria squeezed her eyes shut, sliding down the wet stone until she was kneeling in the mud. She waited for the agonizing tear of fangs, the heavy weight of the beast pinning her down. Instead, she heard a sharp, confused whine. She opened her eyes. Commander Gideon had crossed the distance in a single bound, but he had not attacked. He stood mere inches from her, his massive head leaning down. He took a deep, shuddering breath, inhaling her scent. The terrifying, murderous intent in his eyes vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, primal shock. Slowly, deliberately, the massive russet wolf lowered his front legs into the mud. He bowed his head until his snout rested on the ground at Gloria's trembling knees. Gloria stopped breathing. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the square, broken only by the sound of the rain. Behind Gideon, the rest of the vanguard, dozens of towering, lethal predators, halted. They sniffed the air. A ripple of profound realization swept through the pack. One by one, the monsters fell to the mud. The wet, heavy thuds of massive bodies dropping to their bellies echoed through Oak Haven. 30, 50. 100 wolves, the most feared army in the realm, lay completely prostrate before a shivering, mud-soaked girl in a linen dress. What are you doing?" Gloria whispered, her voice barely carrying over the rain. The pack parted. Down the center of the muddy street, a figure emerged from the fog. He was not in his wolf form, but he was no mere man. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his shoulders impossibly broad beneath a cloak of heavy black furs. Rain ran down a face carved from granite, striking in its harsh, aristocratic beauty. His jaw was clenched, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, and his eyes, a molten, glowing amber, were fixed on Gloria with an intensity that threatened to consume her on the spot. This was Shadwick Vane, the Lycan King of the Crimson Ridge, the Lord of the Iron Claws. The air around him seemed to crackle with raw, untamed power. As he walked past the bowing wolves, they whined softly in submission, pressing their faces deeper into the mud. Shadwick didn't look at them. His eyes never left Gloria. He stopped in front of her. Up close, he was terrifyingly magnificent. The heat radiating from his body pushed back the chill of the rain. He looked down at her bruised knuckles, her soaked dress, the sheer terror in her eyes, and a low, dangerous rumble vibrated in his chest, a sound that made the bowing wolves tremble. Shadwick slowly sank to one knee, ignoring the mud that coated his leather breeches. He reached out a massive, calloused hand. Gloria flinched, but his touch was shockingly gentle. He brushed a wet strand of hair from her cheek, his fingers trailing down to cup her jaw. He leaned in, his nose brushing her collarbone, taking in a deep, lung-expanding breath. "A century," Shadwick murmured, his voice a rich, dark baritone that sent shivers down her spine. "I have walked this earth for a century, drowning in the silence of my own soul. And you were here, hiding in the dirt of human cowards." I don't understand," Gloria choked out, a tear finally spilling over her lashes. "Please, I am nobody. Just let me die quickly." Shadwick's eyes flashed with a terrifying fury, but it wasn't directed at her. "Die," he whispered fiercely, his thumb sweeping away her tear. "You will never know death, little bird. Not while I draw breath." He stood, effortlessly pulling Gloria up with him until she was flush against his chest. He turned his head toward the magistrate's manor. His heightened senses could hear the frantic, terrified heartbeats of the men cowering beneath the floorboards. He could smell the lingering scent of Arthur Pendleton on the heavy iron lock. "Gideon," Shadwick commanded, his voice suddenly ringing out like a thunderclap across the square. The russet wolf rose immediately, awaiting his king's word. "Rip the doors off that house," the Lycan King ordered, a deadly smirk playing on his lips as he tucked Gloria securely under his arm. "My queen needs to pack her things, and I need a word with the men who thought they could lock my soul outside to die." The splintering of solid oak sounded like a cannon blast in the enclosed courtyard. Commander Gideon did not bother with the heavy iron lock. He simply reared back on his massive hind legs and slammed his front paws into the center of the reinforced door. The wood buckled, groaned, and exploded inward in a shower of jagged splinters and twisted iron. From the dark, damp belly of the cellar, the sounds of human panic erupted. Screams of sheer terror pierced the drumming rain as the vanguard of the Lycan horde poured into the magistrate's home. Gloria remained tucked against Shadwick's side, her entire body trembling, though not from the cold. The heat radiating from the Lycan King was like a blazing hearth. He held her with a terrifying possessiveness, his arm an unyielding iron band around her waist, shielding her from the driving rain beneath the overhang of his thick black cloak. "Bring them," Shadwick's voice boomed, carrying effortlessly over the chaos. Moments later, the beasts emerged from the ruined doorway, dragging the inhabitants of the manor by the collars of their fine clothes. Uncle Thomas was tossed into the mud like a discarded sack of flour, his spectacles shattered, his face smeared with dirt. Behind him, whining and thrashing helplessly in the grip of a slate-grey wolf, was Arthur Pendleton. When the grey wolf dropped him, Arthur scrambled backward in the mud, weeping openly. "Take the gold!" Arthur shrieked, his voice pitching into a hysterical squeal. "Take the silver! In the floorboards! My father's vault! We have meat, cattle, whatever you want. Just spare me!" Shadwick looked down at the cowering men with a gaze of utter, profound disgust. The surrounding pack mirrored his disdain, their lips peeling back to bare rows of razor-sharp fangs, low growls vibrating in their chests. "I have no use for your gold, human," Shadwick sneered, his golden eyes narrowing. He stepped forward, pulling Gloria with him. "And I have no taste for cowardice." Uncle Thomas looked up, his eyes wide behind his broken frames. He saw the towering Lycan King, and then his gaze shifted to the girl tucked safely under the monster's arm. Recognition dawned, followed swiftly by confusion. "Gloria?" he gasped. You claimed her? You took the sacrifice?" "Sacrifice," Shadwick repeated, the word tasting like poison on his tongue. A dangerous, lethal stillness fell over him. The ambient temperature in the square seemed to plummet. "You locked this woman, my destined mate, the Queen of the Crimson Ridge, outside in the cold to buy yourselves a few pathetic seconds of life?" The words destined mate hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Uncle Thomas blanched, all the blood draining from his face. Arthur stared at Gloria as if she had suddenly sprouted horns. "Mate!" Arthur stammered, pointing a shaking, mud-caked finger at her. "Her? She's a servant, a nobody. She's my betrothed, you beast!" The moment the word betrothed left Arthur's lips, the air snapped. Shadwick moved faster than the human eye could track. 1 second he was standing beside Gloria. The next, he had crossed the distance and hoisted Arthur into the air by his throat. The wool merchant's son choked and gasped, his legs kicking uselessly feet above the muddy ground. Shadwick's eyes had shifted from molten amber to a glowing, demonic red. The beast beneath his skin was dangerously close to the surface, his fingernails elongating into lethal, black talons that pressed against Arthur's pulse. "Shadwick, no!" Gloria cried out, shocking herself. She didn't care about Arthur's life, but the sheer, overwhelming violence radiating from the king terrified her. She didn't want his first act for her to be murder. Shadwick froze. The monstrous roar building in his chest died instantly at the sound of her voice. He turned his head slightly, his red eyes finding her pale, frightened face. The command of his mate, however fragile, was absolute law. He looked back at Arthur, who was turning a dangerous shade of purple. With a sneer of pure contempt, Shadwick hurled the man aside. Arthur crashed into the wooden troughs of the well, gasping hungrily for air, weeping into the mud. "You are not worthy of the dirt she walks upon," Shadwick spat. He turned his attention to Magistrate Thomas, who was pressing himself flat against the earth, praying for invisibility. "Hear me, Magistrate of Oakhaven. The Blood Moon Treaty is dissolved." Thomas whimpered, bracing for his death. "You will no longer offer up your meager tithes. You will no longer barricade your doors when my kind walks these lands," Shadwick decreed, his voice echoing off the stone buildings. "Because from this day forward, Oakhaven belongs to the crown of the ridge. You are under my protection and my law. And my first law is this: if any man, woman, or child of this village ever speaks ill of Gloria Sterling, if any of you so much as look at her with disrespect, should she ever choose to return, I will not send my vanguard. I will come down this mountain myself, and I will burn this settlement to the ash." He turned his back on the groveling men, his heavy cloak sweeping through the mud. He walked back to Gloria, the terrifying monster, vanishing instantly to be replaced by a devoted protector. He reached down, effortlessly sweeping her into his arms, carrying her bridal style against his broad chest. "We are going home, little Bert," Shadwick murmured, burying his face in her wet hair. Gloria looked over his shoulder one last time. She saw the house that had been her prison, the uncle who had enslaved her, and the man who had tried to leave her to die. Then she looked at the monstrous wolves who parted respectfully to let their king pass, bowing their heads as she was carried away. For the first time in her life, Gloria Sterling felt entirely, completely safe. The journey up the treacherous incline of the Crimson Ridge was a blur of whipping wind, driving rain, and an unnatural, enveloping warmth. Shadwick rode a massive, midnight-black destrier that navigated the slick, rocky paths with the sure-footed grace of a mountain cat. Gloria remained tucked entirely within the cavernous folds of his heavy fur cloak, shielded from the biting wind of the high altitudes. Pressed flush against his broad chest, she was insulated by his radiating heat, which felt like a blazing hearth against her chilled skin. She closed her eyes, listening to the steady, thunderous drumming of his heart beneath his tunic. It was a rhythmic, powerful sound that inexplicably soothed the frantic, lingering panic in her veins. For the first time in her 19 years, the pervasive chill of fear that had lived in her bones began to thaw. She was being carried into a lair of monsters, yet she felt infinitely safer here than she ever had behind the barred doors of her uncle's manor. When they finally breached the dense, ancient tree line of the Whispering Woods, the storm abruptly broke, the dark clouds parting to reveal the legendary Lycan stronghold. Gloria peeked out from beneath the heavy firs and gasped, her breath catching in her throat. She had expected a crude, brutal encampment of savages, perhaps a series of damp caves littered with the bones of their prey. Instead, an ancient, breathtaking fortress carved directly into the living black stone of the mountain loomed before them. Towering iron braziers burned with roaring, 10-foot flames, casting dancing shadows over intricate stone carvings of warring wolves and crescent moons. Cascading waterfalls fell from the jagged cliffs above, masterfully channeled into stone aqueducts that wound like silver ribbons through the massive keep. It was a kingdom of wild, untamed majesty, a testament to a civilization far older and more formidable than anything the humans below had ever built. As Shadwick's great horse struck the smooth cobblestones of the central courtyard, the sheer scale of the Lycan numbers became apparent. Hundreds of them, some in their human forms draped in rich leathers and heavy furs, others in their towering, terrifying beast forms, had gathered to await their king. Yet they did not cheer, murmur, or shout. Instead, a profound, heavy, and deeply respectful silence fell over the massive crowd. They could smell her. More importantly, they could smell the king's undeniable mark upon her. Shadwick dismounted with fluid grace, turning to pull Gloria down gently beside him. As her boots touched the stone, she suddenly felt painfully exposed. Surrounded by the imposing, lethal beauty of the Lycan nobility, she became acutely aware of her ragged, mud-stained linen dress, her bruised knuckles, and her wet, tangled hair. Instinctively she shrank back, pressing her shoulder against Shadwick's solid arm. "Do not hide, Gloria," Shadwick said softly, taking her small, trembling hand and engulfing it in his massive, calloused grip. "You are their queen. Let them look upon you." Before her mind could fully process the weight of his words, the dense crowd parted. A tall, heavily scarred Lycan, with streaks of silver woven through his coarse dark hair, stepped forward. His amber eyes were cold, calculating, and fixed directly on Gloria with unmasked disdain. This was Lord Corvus, the alpha of the northern crags, a grizzled veteran of countless border wars and Shadwick's oldest, most vocal rival within the inner council, "My king," Corvus rumbled, his voice a harsh rasp like grinding stones. He offered a shallow, mocking bow. "You return victorious from the valley, but I see you bring a human pet rather than the tribute we were promised." The air in the courtyard turned instantly venomous, thick with the promise of violence. The surrounding pack held its collective breath, eyes darting between the Northern Alpha and their king. "She is no pet, Corvus," Shadwick replied, his voice dangerously low, practically vibrating through the stone beneath their feet. "She is my destined mate. The mother gave her to me, and I have claimed her." Corvus scoffed loudly, taking a brazen, challenging step closer. "A human, to lead the horde. She is frail, weak. She smells of fear, dirt, and mortal fragility. Our enemies in the Frostlands will laugh at us, Shadwick. A queen must be a warrior, a wolf of the ancient bloodline. She will snap in half the first time the winter winds blow across the ridge." Shadwick calmly dropped Gloria's hand. He didn't yell. He didn't shift into his beast form. He simply moved with a speed that defied physics. In a terrifying blur of motion, Shadwick closed the distance and stood toe to toe with Corvus. He backhanded the massive Northern Alpha with such devastating, explosive force that the sound cracked like a whip across the silent courtyard. Corvus was thrown backward through the air, crashing violently into a heavy stone pillar. Before the Alpha could even attempt to recover his bearings, Shadwick was on him. A heavy, leather-clad boot planted firmly on the older Lycan's chest, pinning him helplessly to the stone floor with bone-crushing pressure. "You dare question the will of the mother?" Shadwick snarled, his upper lip curling to reveal descending, razor-sharp fangs, his eyes glowing like the coals of a forge. "You dare insult my soul in my own courtyard? Look at her, Corvus! Look at her!" Corvus, gasping desperately for air beneath the crushing weight of his king, struggled to turn his head toward where Gloria stood. She survived a life of torment among cowards who would have left her to die, Shadwick roared to the crowd, his voice echoing off the black mountain walls, vibrating with absolute, unyielding pride. She stood before my vanguard without a weapon, and instead of begging for her life, she accepted her fate with a quiet dignity. None of you possess. Her blood is human, yes, but her spirit is forged of iron. The next man, wolf or beast that questions her place at my side will lose their tongue before I take their head. Do I make myself clear? Yes. My king, Corvus choked out, baring his throat in complete submission to the Alpha command. Shadwick stepped back, his chest heaving as he allowed Corvus to scramble to his feet and retreat into the silent ranks. Taking a deep, steadying breath to calm the raging beast within, Shadwick turned and walked back to Gloria. Gloria stared at him, her heart pounding a new, fierce rhythm. Her uncle had always taught her that men ruled by fear, by breaking what was beneath them to stand taller. But Shadwick had not broken her. He had elevated her. He had defended her honor in front of his entire terrifying kingdom, demanding absolute respect, not just for himself, but for her. "Are you all right?" Shadwick asked, his voice softening entirely as he reached out to gently brush a thumb across her cheek. You really mean it," Gloria whispered, her chest swelling with an overwhelming emotion she had never felt before. It wasn't just safety anymore. It was belonging. "I am your equal." "You are my everything," Shadwick corrected fiercely, leaning down to press his forehead against hers. "My heart beats only because yours does. My kingdom is your kingdom." Gloria closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. The comforting scent of rain, pine, and worn leather enveloped her completely. The paralyzing fear that had defined her entire existence melted away, replaced by a fierce, burning warmth. She opened her eyes, looking past Shadwick to the massive horde of Lycans watching their every move. She stood up straighter. She lifted her chin. She stopped shivering. From the front ranks, Commander Gideon stepped forward. The massive warrior looked at Gloria, and just as he had done in the muddy square of Oakhaven, he dropped heavily to one knee, bowing his head in absolute reverence. Seeing their formidable commander submit, the rest of the horde followed without hesitation. Thousands of terrifying beasts and fierce warriors sank to the cold stone floor of the courtyard, bowing deeply to the human girl in the ragged dress. Suddenly, a single, piercing howl erupted from the high watchtower, a sound of pure triumph and celebration. It was taken up by another and another, until the entire mountain shook with the joyous, deafening roar of the pack welcoming their new queen. Gloria smiled, weaving her fingers tightly with the Lycan King, knowing she would never walk in the shadows again. Did you expect that twist? The weak human girl becoming the most powerful queen in the realm. Gloria and Shadwick's story proves that true strength isn't about claws or fangs, but the courage to face your fears and the devotion of a soulmate who will burn the world down to protect you. If you loved this epic Lycan romance, smash that like button, share with a fellow fantasy lover, and subscribe for more thrilling stories.